Most developers are learning Rust without even knowing what career paths are available to Rust developers, or worse, end up going down the wrong Rust career path by default. So in this video, I'll break down the top 4 Rust career paths that are most in demand, and in each of these paths, what your day-to-day work would look like, the different salary ranges you can expect, and most importantly, which Rust career path you should choose based on your personal development experience and your specific career goals. Now, one big mistake I see all the time is most Rust developers jump straight into the path of systems programming by default, because it sounds logical and impressive. But here's the problem. This is probably the hardest Rust career path. It has the longest ramp-up time to become hireable, and there are fewer entry-level Rust job opportunities compared to other paths. So people spend months going deep into OS kernels and never actually get close to getting a job. Instead, if you want a shot at getting hired fast, you want to pick a path that matches your current skills and experience, your timeline for landing your next job, and the type of work you actually enjoy doing. So let's go over each Rust career path and why it may or may not be the right fit for you personally. We'll start with a path that probably applies to most of you watching right now: backend and web services. First, we'll talk about the pay for backend Rust roles. If you're a mid-level engineer, you're usually looking at somewhere between 100 to 200K, maybe 220K total compensation, depending on the company, of course. And for seniors, you can expect 220 to 300K and beyond at larger companies with bigger budgets and more demanding qualifications. And for junior developers, well, you probably already know you're cooked at this point, no matter what type of developer you are. Alright, so this is a mid-level backend role at GitLab. Base salary is roughly 100 to 210,000 USD. So what would you be doing day to day? You'd be working on backend services in Rust. For this particular role, knowledge graphs, which means you're dealing with messy, interconnected data about codebases and dev workflows. So it's not just CRUD APIs. You'll build backend systems that ingest data, process it, and make it useful for things like AI agents, analytics, or higher level features across the platform. And this is where it gets interesting. Even at a mid-level backend role, look at what's expected of you. You're not just picking up tickets and implementing endpoints. You're owning features end to end. You're part of backend system design. You're making trade-offs like, how do we store this data? How do we process it efficiently? What breaks at scale? You're also improving the stuff that most people ignore: logging, metrics, runbooks, the boring backend pieces that actually make systems reliable. That's what companies expect these days, especially post-AI. It's not just can you build APIs, but can you think like a feature owner and build systems that hold up in production? So if you've already been building backend systems at your current job, you already understand most of these, as long as you learn the Rust piece on top of it. That's why I think this is the best entry point for most people. You're taking something you already know, APIs, databases, async code, and applying it to Rust, where the expectations are a bit higher around performance and reliability. For most people, you're not learning a completely new world. You're fine-tuning the backend skills you already have. But if you want to go deeper than backend work, that's where the next path comes in: systems programming / infrastructure. This is the one people picture when they hear Rust jobs. Operating systems, compilers, runtimes, databases, virtualization, basically the foundational layer that everything else runs on. And to be fair, this is where Rust really shines. At the mid-level, you can reasonably expect 150 to 250 total comp, and up to 280K at bigger companies. At the senior level, 250K to 400K plus, especially at typical FANG or Mag 7 companies. Some of the highest paying roles in the Rust ecosystem tend to live here, but it also demands the most technical, domain-specific understanding out of the engineers. Let me show you a real example. This is a performance engineer role at Oxide Computer. Oxide is an all-Rust company that's building an entire cloud computer from scratch. Hardware, operating system, hypervisor, storage engine, control plane, all in Rust. And this role pays 250K USD no matter where you're located. And what are you doing? You're optimizing performance across the entire stack, from the host OS to the hypervisor to the block storage service. You're profiling, finding bottlenecks, and sometimes rewriting entire subsystems, all in Rust and C. That's what systems programming looks like in practice. You're most likely not building features that users would be able to scroll through or click on. You'll be building the low-level systems and infrastructure that those features depend on. So think Linux kernel drivers in Rust, storage engines, hypervisors, container runtimes, compilers, the layer that everything else sits on top of. And the companies hiring here are exactly who you'd expect. A lot of infrastructure providers like Microsoft, Google, and Meta, Amazon's kernel teams, Oxide, Redis, that part of the world. Now, what does it take to land these types of roles? First, you'll need to really understand how systems work. Memory, scheduling, how the kernel interacts with hardware. Also, you'll need to be comfortable working with C or C++ code bases, because a lot of this is replacing or extending existing systems. Based on my experience working with students who want to transition their career towards this direction, this isn't something you speedrun, because of the depth of domain knowledge these types of jobs usually demand. But if you're the kind of person who likes going all the way down the stack and understanding how things actually work under the hood, this might just be perfect for you. If you want to work on the layer that everything else depends on, and you're willing to put in the time, effort, and focus, this is easily one of the most technically rewarding paths in Rust. Alright, so that's for Rust engineers who want to work in systems programming and infrastructure programming. But now, let's shift gears a bit. The next career path is embedded IoT and robotics. This category is about running Rust code on physical devices. Microcontrollers, drones, robots, cars. Your code is controlling things in the real world, rather than running on a remote server somewhere else across the globe. And in terms of pay, you could be looking at around 100 to 180, 200k for mid-level, and 150 to 280k for senior level. These are the ranges we typically see, with the higher end usually in defense and automotive. And this is one of the fastest growing paths right now. The automotive industry is going all in on Rust. Volvo, Toyota, Mercedes, etc. These companies are all moving towards Rust for safety critical systems. Then you got companies like Anduril building defense robotics in Rust, Amazon's robotics division, and an increasing number of defense and aerospace startups. And the demand is growing. So while it's a more specialized path, there's a lot of momentum behind it, especially since it's not too hard to imagine why Rust is commonly used in these fields. Here's a real example. This is a staff Rust software engineer role at Ford. The salary range is between 146,000 USD to 277,000 USD. And you'll be designing and developing Rust-based infotainment systems for Ford's electric vehicles. Next-gen in-car software, all in Rust. So when I say automotive companies are going all in on Rust, I mean it. Now, the skills required for this Rust career path are pretty specialized. You'll need to know embedded Rust, and specifically the no standard library environment, because most of these devices don't have a typical operating system. You'll need to understand hardware interfaces like SPI, I2C, UART, and GPIO. You need to understand real-time constraints. And you need to be comfortable debugging at the hardware level, like oscilloscopes and logic analyzers, not just print statements. That said, all of these skills can certainly be learned. In fact, one of our Rust Live Accelerator students actually got hired at Ford to do embedded development. And he didn't have any embedded experience before joining the program. So who should pick this path? If you're coming from embedded C or C++, this is a no-brainer. You already understand the hardware constraints, the memory limitations, the real-time requirements. Rust just makes all of that safer and more modern. You're not learning a completely new domain from scratch. You're getting a massive upgrade in tooling and safety to whatever you're already used to. But if you don't have a hardware background, this can be a tough domain to start. There's a lot of domain knowledge beyond just the language. Okay, so this next one is a path I think most developers sleep on. Developer tooling. You know ripgrep, bat, fd, the Z editor, Ruf, the Python linter that's replacing Flake 8 and Black, UV, the Python package manager replacing pip. All of these are written in Rust. And here's what's interesting. Rust is kind of becoming the default language for building fast developer tools. If it needs to be fast, cross-platform, and reliable, chances are someone is building it in Rust right now. So pay. For mid-level, you're looking at 120 to 200k. Senior, 200k to 300k plus. Similar to backend, but the companies tend to be smaller and more startup oriented, which means equity can push the ceiling way higher if things go well. Companies hiring for this include Astral, the team behind Ruf and UV, Vercel, GitHub, JetBrains, and a ton of dev tool startups. And here's a real example. This is a Rust engineer role at Zed, the team behind the Zed code editor. You might know them as the team that built Atom and TreeSitter. They built a brand new code editor from scratch in Rust with GPU acceleration, and the codebase is nearly 1 million lines of Rust. So what would you be working on? core editing systems, real-time collaboration, performance optimization, cross-platform development. And more broadly in this space, you'll be building CLI tools, build systems, package managers, linters, formatters, code editors, basically the software that other developers use every single day. Now, the skills for this one are kind of a mix, which is what makes it interesting. You need to care about developer experience because your users are other engineers and we have opinions. You need to be good at cross-platform stuff, Linux, macOS, Windows, because your tool has to work everywhere. Performance is table stakes. That's the whole reason people are building these tools in Rust in the first place. And depending on what you're building, you might need some parsing or compiler knowledge. Things like AST manipulation, tree sitter, that kind of thing. So who should pick this path? Honestly, if you're the type of person that obsesses over developer experience, if you get annoyed when tools are slow and you've ever thought, I could build this better, this is going to be your path in Rust. Okay, so let's zoom out for a bit. With all of these career path options, which one should you go for? I think it comes down to two questions. First, what is your background? Because that determines where you'll have the fastest on-ramp. If you're coming from backend, web, or full stack development, go backend. You won't be starting from zero. The mental models you already have, APIs, databases, async code, they all transfer directly. You're just swapping the language and upgrading into more serious systems. If you're coming from embedded C or C++, go embedded. You already understand the hardware constraints, the memory limitations. Rust just makes that work safer and more modern. Of course, you can pick a path where you don't have domain experience, but just know it's going to take you longer to acquire the skills necessary to land a Rust job in that field. The second question you want to ask yourself when choosing a Rust career path is, what do you actually want to spend your time doing? If you're watching this video, you likely want to switch to using Rust professionally. But more specifically, what things in Rust do you want to build and work on every day? If you want to build things that other developers use, tools, CLIs, compilers, go dev tooling. If you want to work on the foundational layer that everything else runs on, operating systems, databases, runtimes, go systems. Or if you only care about getting a Rust job as fast as possible, backend might be your answer. Everyone's situation, goals, and aspirations are different. But my recommendation is this. Start where you can get hired the quickest. For example, get in the door with backend or tooling. Build some real systems in Rust, and then move into what you really want to do with Rust. Perhaps systems programming. But at that point, you'll be able to do it from a position of strength and credibility. Pick the path that gets you in the door. You can navigate from there. Now, you might be wondering, what about crypto or finance or AI? I didn't include these as separate paths because they can all be mapped onto the same four paths that we've talked about. For example, in crypto, a backend system for a crypto exchange, that's not too different from traditional backend. If you're building data pipelines or model serving APIs, that's backend too. If you're working on inference engines or GPU runtime optimization in AI infrastructure, that would be systems programming and infrastructure engineering in Rust. Same thing for finance. Once you understand these four main paths, you can apply them to pretty much any domain where Rust is being used. Now, here's one thing most developers get wrong. They watch a video like this, pick a path, go back to tutorials, build a few small projects, and then wonder why they're not getting interviews. And it's pretty simple. Companies don't hire based on tutorials you've watched. They hire based on evidence that you're an excellent Rust engineer. Evidence that you can build real production-grade software. That you've actually shipped real projects. That gap between knowing some Rust syntax and actually becoming a hireable Rust talent is the whole reason we built the Rust Live Accelerator. It's a structured, mentorship-based program where you build the kind of projects and professional development experience in Rust that actually gets you hired. So if you're serious about turning Rust into a career, and not just something you learn on the side, find out more about the Rust Live Accelerator at letsgetrusty.com/join, or click the link in the pinned comment below. Thanks for watching, and remember to stay rusty.